Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Same Old Arsenal podcast. I hope you're all doing really well on this fine Sunday afternoon. Disappointing weekend in the sense that Arsenal aren't playing. Obviously, knocked out of the FA Cup not too long ago against Liverpool, so we've got a bit of a free weekend. But what that does mean is we've got plenty of time to prepare for the game that we're going to be previewing in this podcast, Forest on Tuesday night. And to do that, to join me is the wonderful Merv. How you doing, my friend?
Thank you, Cookie. No, I'm doing good, thanks. I'm doing good. The sun is shining where I am, so that always makes for a good day.
Good, pleased to hear it. It's been a bit of a while since it's been on the podcast, hasn't it?
It has. But never mind. I don't take it personally. No, the guests are always so fabulous that there's always an interesting conversation. So it's an honour to be back again.
Oh, it's way too kind, mate. Way too kind. What have you been up to in the meantime since we last put it together?
Bits and pieces. Work, football wise. Do you mean, or work wise?
No, both, mate. Both. No. This is a personal podcast, mate. Whatever you've got to say.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's no. I've been quite busy. Start of a new year. Stuff I do stuff around the world of work, so a bit of analysis, writing, and stuff. So it's always a busy time at the start of a new year because everybody wants to predict what's going to happen over the next 12 months in terms of tech, in terms of the world of work and stuff. Where football, we don't think like that. We think August to May as opposed to January to December. So no, there's that and been, well, I wouldn't say enjoying visiting every Arsenal game, but anyway, a couple of them have been good.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously done a preview review on the Palace game, but just looking back to that, I mean, after what was a couple of pretty dismal results over Christmas and New Year against Fulham and West Ham, just to be reassured, I think, with such a commanding victory against Palace. I mean, as poor as they were, I thought we were excellent on the day. Probably maybe should have scored more, but to get back to winning ways, especially with Forest coming up and with that Liverpool game on the horizon, I mean, how important was it to get that win?
We had to, because otherwise we'd started losing touch, obviously, with the top group, possibly. And then once you're, 5, 6, 7 points behind, it becomes a bit of a mountain. And, I've seen that many times in the past. Obviously, I've been going for many seasons, and yeah, I mean, there've been some times when you think, oh, we're in with a shout, and then around this time of the year we start to lose 2 or 3, and we begin to drop out the race. So it was important to do that. Palace were probably the right team to be playing at that time. I suppose the issue may be of creating a lot of chances but not putting them all away. It's still, I think, is there. It's at the back of my mind. I mean, obviously with 2 corners, but then had it finished at 3-0. I mean, the third goal was obviously outstanding, but I mean, had it finished at 3-0 for all the dominance, I'd have been a bit, I'd have felt a bit flat afterwards, although it was a 3-0 win, if you know what I mean. But those 2 goals right at the end, I mean, gave us all a buzz, gave us all a lift, and hopefully it's effectively kind of reignited things.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I don't want to say it sounds arrogant coming out of a 5-0 win thinking we could and should have done more. But given the problems that we've had, I don't think it's wrong to say that we could have done more. Like, we absolutely could have scored more goals in that game. And I was the exact same as you. If we hadn't have got those Martinelli goals at the end, I probably would have been a little bit, that's a great win, 3-0 against Palace. But we had more opportunities to score, and it's going to be really telling in our next game if this is still a problem. But those Martinelli goals just put my mind at ease a little bit. Don't get me wrong, the worries still aren't completely eradicated, but I hope, particularly for someone like Martinelli, who's struggled this season, for him to get 2 what were fantastic finishes from him, I really hope that propels him on to have a really strong second half of the season. And I can say the same for Trossard. I mean, he took his goal so well, didn't he? And for those 2 guys to score, it's great for them.
It is, yeah. It could be that because Martinelli's been, some games he hasn't started, and I don't think there's anything wrong. I think it's an outstanding prospect and still is. And I haven't met an Arsenal fan that doesn't think that. But it was, I suppose, a little bit of concern that it's maybe a bit tactical to not start him and then kind of bring him on to use his energy and pace against a team that maybe is beginning to tire. I think he's more than that. And of course, the moment he comes on, he gives us something that we weren't getting before. And it maybe is because we still haven't worked out, dare I say it, how best to use Kai Havertz or what the kind of role he should be performing is. I know where I sit, it's a very mixed crowd. Some think it's what's he doing there, and others think no, I can see what he's doing there. It's just taking time to bed in with everybody, and it's a lot of subtle things that happen where he's effectively creating space for others because two defenders are on him and stuff. So I think that to then get Martinelli to come on that side and then score those two very Henry-esque kind of finish. I think gave everybody a real lift. It was almost a shame that we didn't have a game then a few days later.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, on the plus side, it has given us a lot of time to prepare for this game. Whereas Forest, they played Bristol City on Friday, drew 0-0. Yeah. They've got a replay in that game. So we should be going into this game arguably fresher. I mean, it's not even arguable. We should be fresher. Before we get on to actually talking about Forest, there's a couple of things I just want to touch on quickly. Obviously, breaking news in the world of football that Jurgen Klopp has left Liverpool or will be leaving Liverpool at the end of the season. I mean, I don't know about you, Merv, but that completely took me off guard. I didn't hear any murmurings about that. I thought he would be at Liverpool for years upon years upon years to come. I know he's in his 50s, but that's by no means young, old for a manager, should I say. What do you make of it?
I think there are. I mean, I've seen a few different takes, and I get those takes that infer that he's coming to obviously a time. The ownership might be changing. He's got players coming to the end of their contracts, like Salah, like Van Dijk, and is he going to have the money to rebuild? Does he have the energy to rebuild? I suppose. And is it, has he effectively got the maximum out of the group that he's put together? And there's got 2 or 3 new younger signings bedding in, and maybe it's the time to hand over. I mean, I think back to like Arsenal managers, and I suppose historically managers would just need, when they stopped playing, they needed a job, and they managed, and then they still needed a job after that. So if they left one, they had another. Whereas the kind of rewards for management at the highest level now are so much greater that they can just step back and take a period of time out. And he might well come back in and manage a European club. He might get more of a role, I suppose, in kind of UEFA or FIFA or something. I don't know. But because of the passion and energy, and maybe that's a double-edged sword, because he still gives so much of it, as we saw in the recent cup game when he's on the touchline, and maybe he's becoming a bit not tired out with it, but maybe he needs a rest from that hyper intensity. But I think that he's brought a very different style to the Premier League, and I think that in the way that Arsene Wenger did all those years ago, and I think that it'll be missing. But I mean, I'm pleased as an Arsenal fan. I'm pleased he's going.
Yeah, I was pleased until I realised that they're probably going to end up with Xabi Alonso, who's doing brilliant things at Leverkusen. So I'm kind of hoping that doesn't come to fruition, and they end up with Steven Gerrard, who failed pretty miserably at Aston Villa.
I can't see that, but it could be Alonso. But again, it's to do with it's to do with how much the owners, or the new owners, if they're sold, have got to invest, because it is, the kind of players that are coming to the end of their contracts need to be renewed. Players like Mohamed Salah, players like Van Dijk are now into 30. Do you keep them? Do you sell them? How much money will you have? What would a replacement for Mo Salah cost? I mean, obviously, thank God we've got a really strong atmosphere. A really strong team togetherness at Arsenal,
and a young team as well.
Yeah, because the obvious replacement for Mo Salah is Bukayo Saka. I mean, if you're a different supporter, you'd think, well, just go to Arsenal, offer him a load of money for Saka. But I think that there's so much more at Arsenal now that I don't think we need to be in fear of that. And also Saka's been with us since he was a kid. But I mean, to replace 2 or 3 players like that, and Trent as well, it will be difficult, and they might have to go through 2 or 3 seasons of a rebuild, and maybe that's what he didn't want to do. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because they had quite a bit of a rebuild this window, I think, where they lost a couple of players, and they brought in the likes of Gravenberch and McAllister, and they just completely rebuilt their midfield. I mean, Endo as well. I think the midfield that lined up against us in one of the games was a completely brand spanking new midfield. So he has done a lot of work there. But this isn't the Jurgen Klopp podcast. But what I do want to ask you, Merv, is with this news breaking and the timing of it, with half the season left to go, you can imagine, especially at a club like Liverpool, where there's so much emotion and morale around these types of things, they're really going to rally and unite around something like this to make sure that he does win the Premier League, which, you know, it could go one of two ways. It could work for them. They could get overly emotional and throw it away. But from your point of view, from an Arsenal perspective, looking ahead to that game against Liverpool, but also at the bigger picture, do you think this is a factor to take into consideration?
I think so. I mean, I think that you know, if we, I hate to talk about it, but next Sunday, if we don't win, then I think that, you know, that would put quite a distance between them and us.
Well, do you think I think we could get away with a draw, but if we were to lose, that's when I'd be pretty up in arms.
Oh God, yeah. It depends how strong they are, because from the bits I pick up from what's been happening in Africa, and Salah's come back, obviously, I don't know that he'll be fit. I think they've got a couple of injuries going into the game.
Alexander-Arnold as well
next weekend, yeah. So it would be a perfect time for us to say, good. We'll be no, not the first, the second Premier League crowd to say farewell to Jurgen Klopp. It'd be nice to give him a send off. Hopefully with a win. I don't see why not. I mean, I think that if we're on our game, we should be able to, but we're not previewing that game. We're previewing the Forest game, but it'd be quite I suppose we will be, when they play us, that will be his first, I suppose, game since his announcement against one of the top 5 or 6 teams. So it will be quite emotional, I should think.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on from Jurgen Klopp, I mean, the other thing I wanted to touch on is the transfer market, because it's been very, very quiet from an Arsenal point of view in terms of outgoings as well as incomings. We're now right at the tail end of the window. No murmurings of anything happening, which I have to say I'm not too fussed about. I mean, I'm not too invested in the idea of Arsenal going out there, getting a stopgap signing on loan. I really like that we haven't really got players on loan apart from David Raya, who we know is going to become permanent. I like the togetherness of the squad, that they're all building towards a long-term thing. I don't think a short-term fix is the way to go. And given that we've got Partey back now, Yuri and Timber is maybe coming back in March, hopefully, maybe a bit earlier. I don't want to be too optimistic. But with those players coming back, I'm not feeling a huge need to unnecessarily invest. But how do you feel about it coming into these final few days of the window?
I, like you, I would agree with a lot of what you've said. And yes, I think, you know, it's the traditional, you know, is Thomas Partey going to be like a new signing to have him
and
back?
Will he stay fit? That's the question.
Will he stay fit? And is he coming back in? Well, probably not Tuesday, but hopefully next Sunday to play right back, or is he coming back in at the base of the midfield? So I don't know if we're going to persist with this, with him as the inverted right back or not. Which I don't know if that is, we get the best out of him in terms of the dominating a game and the attacking impetus. But I think it obviously helps to get a player like him back. I think from Timber, we only saw a couple of games, but from what we saw, we could see he was a special player. It would be great to get him back in March. I think that I always like to see a signing to freshen things up, like the way Trossard came in, and he was completely. He gave this time last. He gave a different dimension to our attack for the next few weeks or so. It would be nice to see that, because scoring, you know, it seems to be a bit of an issue still. We do a lot of great approach work, but I suppose even against Palace, you know, Martinelli's 2 were at the very end, and the first 2 were from set pieces. So we're still creating a lot of chances from open play that we're not converting. But you know, you can't really find a striker in the January window who's going to come in and a striker at a decent price to come in and completely change that, I think. And I don't believe that we've got any kind of budget to go out and spend like 100 million on a striker. So it's probably how we are able to, I suppose, get the maximum out of what we've got. But I don't know where I'd want to see another player. So it's kind of we seem to have the wide positions covered. If Partey's fit, we've got the midfield kind of covered. We're not about to release anybody like Jorginho or anything. So I think it would only be another attacking option. But whether or not that would we can get one at the right price, and whether or not that would actually unbalance things, I don't know. A lot of it might depend on how we working out how we get the best out of Havertz, for example. Because I suspect as well the Kroenkes would say, well, that was a £70 million signing, and we need to see that.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting with Partey coming back. Maybe we'll see Havertz moved further up the pitch and we see him more in that striking role, which I think, I'm not necessarily sure when we brought him in, he was the Xhaka replacement. I've always been of the opinion that Declan Rice was a Xhaka replacement, and had Partey been fit, we'd have seen a midfield three of Rice in the left 8, Ødegaard in the right 8, Partey at the base. That's your midfield sorted, and Havertz would have been someone that could play in the midfield, but also could be that guy that could rotate with Jesus, that could play with Jesus if Jesus was to play out on the flank. So lots of different options there. And I hope that when Partey is fit and when we've got Havertz, as someone that can be an option in those different areas, that we start to see the best of him. But I'm a little bit worried about this game, if I'm being honest with you, because this has not been a happy hunting ground for us in previous years. I know last season it was the game that confirmed that we weren't going to win the league. Really horrible game. Season before that, disaster class from Nuno Tavares, who now somehow plays at Nottingham Forest, and we went out to the FA Cup. And then it wasn't too many seasons before that we also got knocked out of the FA Cup by Forest when we had that horrible blue toothpaste kit, which I really wasn't a fan of. So I'm not feeling too optimistic about this game. But on the other hand, we've got a lot of players returning from injury. We have to win it. No excuses after the defeats to West Ham and Fulham, which are still hurting us. If we want to go into that game against Liverpool still believing that we can win this league, you have to win at Forest away. So how are you feeling going into it, Merv?
I think you've summed it up well, so I've got to find a different angle, because I think you're right. In recent seasons, it hasn't been a place where we've particularly given our best. I like to think back, I'm, I suppose, a little bit older than you. I like to think back to like the night we won there when they were European champions and hadn't lost at home for about 3 years or something, and went up there and won in the FA Cup. And that was a great night. But I mean, I'm not. It was a long time ago now. But we shouldn't. But if we are going to make a run for the league title, then we shouldn't have this trepidation. It should be the kind of game. They've had a lot of games recently. We've only really had 2 games in January, and they've had replay, and they've got as you say, another replay. So it should we should be quite fresh, and I think hopefully we can use that pace to dominate. I think there is a chance it could go a bit almost like that Luton game, because they're going to be up for it. So it might be the kind of game where we're conceding and we're finding ourselves under pressure that we're maybe not expecting. It could, worst case scenario, it could be a bit like the Villa game where we just don't seem to fire. But I think we will. I mean, I think given that we've had quite a bit of time off, we've been to Dubai, we obviously aren't playing this weekend. And they really looked up for it against Palace. They were straight out from the start. That's what I'm hoping we'll see. They're probably going to be a bit, not flat, but, another replay, a game probably they thought they would have won. So it's hopefully we're going to get them at a time when they're a little bit in between a cup run and a kind of, because they're not fighting relegation at the moment, but they're not mid-table. So it's kind of, they know they need to get a few points, but hopefully we can go out and dominate from the start. I think that's the important thing. If we let their crowd and they, I suppose they're coming into us and almost dominating from the start, that's where we get on the back foot. And we don't want another repeat of Fulham.
Yeah, and I think that's been our problem going to grounds like Forest, where the atmosphere has just got on top of us and they have fantastic support at home. And we just fall into our shells a little bit. And I really want to see Arsenal overcome that mental resilience, or show a bit of mental resilience, should I say, and just come through this game unscathed. I do expect there to be sustained periods of pressure. like they were against Luton. It's interesting you mentioned that game because I could definitely see it going like that. If you look at Forest's past couple of results, aside from the 0-0 against Bristol, they had 2 back-to-back 3-2s. They won obviously against Blackpool. They lost to Brentford. But before that, they beat United at home. Brilliant result at St James's Park against Newcastle away. And given that Steve Cooper's left, Nuno's come in, fair to say it's been a bit of a new lease of life for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a new manager bounce. Plus, he's an experienced manager, and he, I think maybe hasn't had the best kind of deal in his last role or two. So I think he will know how to set up. I mean, he will set them up to play well against us. He'll probably use the fact that we're going to be full of energy because we haven't played much. So he might use that as a kind of, to really kind of try and put the pressure on us from the start rather than that let us get into our stride and dictate the flow of the game. So it might be more of a disrupting kind of approach. But I mean, he we're not going to face a manager under pressure. We're going to face a new manager who is having a bit of a bounce. So I suppose that is a concern. But again, I think we're not going to get anywhere this season if we don't go into games like this and impose ourselves the way we possibly were at the beginning, at the start, and the way we were last season up until those last half a dozen games or so. And I think that it's a great opportunity given the lack of playing time, so the freshness, for us to really go at it from the start, as opposed to we've just had, a grueling, had we beaten Liverpool, we've just had a grueling FA Cup game against whoever, and then 3 days later, we're going up there. I think we should be fresh and off the back of a really good win. So it's hopefully, I mean, I don't think there's any talk of any new injuries. So hopefully it's pretty much the same 11 to go at it from the start.
Do you think there's a bit of a point to prove for not only Arsenal, but Arteta as well going into this game, given what happened there last season where we were hopeless in that game, if we're being quite honest. And then the way we fell out of the FA Cup the season before that. I mean, this has to be a game that Arteta, surely from a personal point of view, will want to be getting the better of.
Oh, without doubt. Yeah, I think he knows the spotlight's on, and he knows that I think the Palace game is almost the start of the second half of the season for him, and whether or not they've not solved, but the issue that was beginning to dog us, hopefully they've been able to work that out in Dubai and on the training pitch. But I think for him, it's important to put that marker down, because it, as you say, it's been a ground where in recent times it's signaled a downturn, if you like. It's signaled not a falling apart, but it's signaled us kind of under a run of underperforming games, and either come in the middle of it or it's begun it. So I think that he will be very up for this. It won't be a case of, oh, look, it's Forest, we're fresh, we'll just go out and dictate the game. I think he'll get everybody from the start pretty much focused and on it. And Absolutely. If they can have someone like Partey back in, I don't know if he'll start. He might come off the bench because he's obviously not played since the first game. But I think just having him around the squad hopefully will give that push. And once they can get him in midfield with Declan Rice and Odegaard, that kind of hopefully that kind of unit will then dominate, certainly in games like this.
You'd certainly hope so. And before we move on to part 2 of the podcast, and where we'll be taking a look at Thomas Partey and how he can influence this team in the second half of the season, perfect time to mention our wonderful sponsor, Ruth Beckart. As always, thank you ever so much to Ruth for being a part of this podcast, for sponsoring us. Her work is absolutely magnificent. You can see a couple of examples to those watching on YouTube on the screen now. I mean, it's just perfect for Christmas presents. I'm talking a bit prematurely there, for birthday presents, for things like that. She does cards, prints, badges. I mean, anything you could want. Check out her Etsy shop. Follow her on Twitter. Her work is absolutely sublime. So, yeah, thank you to Ruth. Make sure you go and check her out. But I did say, Merv, that we were going to be talking about a certain Thomas Partey. Obviously, It was delightful to see those pictures of him back in training. When you think about it, he's been out for the best part of 4 months. And we know he's had his injury problems, but this feels like his most significant injury since he's been at Arsenal. I do expect us to part ways with him at the end of the season, if I'm being quite frank, because I think he's had these problems. We just can't rely on him. But that's not to say he can't play a massive part in the last period of the season, both in the Premier League and in the Champions League. So to see him back, how important is that for us?
I think it's hugely important because he's a dominating presence, and I think some of the younger players are look to him as somebody more experienced, was the driving force. I mean, we think back to the first half of last season. Goals like against Spurs and stuff. He was very much a part of everything we did that was good. And I think he was the dynamism. And I'm guessing some of them are looking a bit more towards Declan Rice at the moment, albeit he's still relatively young by comparison. So I think that he is important because he's a very much a calming influence as well. I mean, he doesn't get panicked particularly. He particularly playing out from the back. I've seen some clips people have put together of some great Thomas Partey moments, and it's called he's very cool on it. He doesn't get rushed. I mean, once or twice, obviously, when you're pressurized, it happens. But I mean, he's usually exhibits a level of control that possibly we're missing once or twice. So I think, to have him back and to have that kind of solid midfield three, it would be very, very good. It might help, as we say, with that kind of pushing Kai Havertz further forward as to more of the striker, and then creating a different kind of problem for defences. As I say, I'm hoping he's not playing the inverted fullbacks. I think we kind of need him in the middle. But it might be that's the role that Mikel Arteta sees him in. So we'll then see how that mirrors Zinchenko on the left, I suppose. But I would think it's important for the team, particularly the young players, because he's obviously been around for the last few years, and they kind of look up to him and they've seen him take a lead role. So I think it's always important to have everybody fit. But I think there are certain players that you culturally you miss when they're not there. And I think he's one of those because he's usually, when he's playing well, it usually means we're dominating the midfield.
He's one of those very few players that can play the game at his own pace and doesn't really make it look slow. Like, he's so elegant on the ball, the way he can bypass a man, quickly lay it off. He keeps things ticking over. And looking at the bigger picture, do you think part of the reason why we've struggled so much in front of goal at times this season, not all the time, but sometimes, is because we're missing someone like him to play that line-breaking pass, just to beat one or two men with a quick turn of the shoulder? Because Declan Rice, as good as he is, he doesn't. It's not really his game. Like, he's quite a different profile of player. So, do you think, in answer to the question, we're missing Thomas Partey in terms of contributing to goals?
Yes, I mean, as you say, the line-breaking pass is hugely important, particularly when we're attacking from the right. So I think that it's just his general presence and his ability to read a game and to see things, I think, has been missed. Hopefully he can stay fit, and hopefully we'll come back and play at the level that he was playing, like the first half of last season. And I felt he would have been playing this season as well, from what we saw in pre-season before the injury. So I think that it will give the whole squad a boost and a lift. Because I think when you look at it, it's the defence is settled. We've got some fantastic defenders. We've got some very skillful midfielders and attackers, and it just kind of needs that thing to knit it together. And it might be his presence, certainly for the second half of this season. That's the thing that we need, and it's that level of control, as you say. And I said before, he doesn't get rushed, he doesn't get harassed. He kind of, there's a calmness there, I think, and that, I think, is important because it then spreads to other players as well. And I don't mean that they can take their foot off the gas or anything, but I mean the calmness gives confidence.
Yeah, I just hope that he's available for that game against Liverpool. I mean, I don't think he'll start this one against Forest. I would fully expect him to be given 15, 20, 30 minutes, another week of training, well, half a week, before we go into that game against Liverpool. And he starts that game with Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard, because it's criminal, isn't it, that this
Mm.
season we've barely seen them. We saw them in the Community Shield as a free. They were excellent. And other than that, we've not really truly seen them together as a midfield three, because when Partey was in the team, he was playing that inverted right back role.
Yeah.
And we've just not seen that midfield three enough. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's up there with one of the best midfields in the league. I mean, to have that against Liverpool, to have that against City, I'd fancy that midfield three every single day of the week. So how important is it that we're able to keep him fit so we can go into those big games and play what is arguably one of the best midfields the league has to offer?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important he stays fit, because it's going to be, you know, there's 3 or 4 teams at least who are hopefully, you know, or are all hoping that they can push for the title. Obviously, there's Liverpool, there's City, there's us, there's Villa. Yeah, I think United and Newcastle are off the pace a bit at the moment. There's another team, I don't know. There's another team in London, I think they've got a chance, but I don't think so. But I mean, you know, it's not. And one thing is that obviously when you've got 4, 5, 6 teams that are all going for it, they can begin to take points off of each other. But I think it's crucial that we're only going to be challenging in those final 2 or 3 games of this season if we're playing at a level and intensity right the way through. And you've got to have him, I think, there for that, because that will give us the midfield. I suppose in some respects from the squad, we've got the perfect midfield group. Timber as well, if we can get him back as early as March, because he was just from just the Community Shield. It's like, oh my God, what he was outstanding. And I think part of the difficulties this season, take nothing away from Zinchenko, has been that, you know, what we saw pre-season, what we saw in the Community Shield, we haven't seen. You know, he was a huge part of, you know, Mikel Arteta's plans for this season, and we just haven't had him. So I think that both Partey and Timber would have been regular starters if they were both fit. So it would be great to actually get them back in the team. And as you say, that Community Shield, to me I felt great at the end of that, because I know we went on penalties, but it was just we were
the better team though, weren't we?
Yeah, we went toe to toe with them, and we were the better team overall. And there were some great performances that filled you with optimism.
Absolutely. I mean, the performances of Partey and Timber in that game were excellent, which is why I think we were filled with so much optimism, because you just can't. I mean, Partey, you can kind of foresee happening at some point. I don't think we could have expected it to have been for as long as it has been, especially when it started off as kind of just a niggle, which has developed into what this is. But Timber's just rotten luck, absolutely rotten. I think he'd have played so many games for us this season, and we'd be, you know, further in the table, because he is that good of a player. And, you know, you factor in someone like Tomiyasu, who's had a couple of injuries here and there, was brilliant whenever he's played. Now he's off to the Asia Cup. Hopefully he comes back. But with Partey coming back, with Tomiyasu coming back not too far away, even Fabio Vieira coming back, and then Timber on the horizon, we're so close to a fully fit team. And then you take into account you've got Emile Smith-Rowe, who came on for half an hour against Crystal Palace.
Yeah, he looked great.
He was brilliant. Yeah, really, really good. It could still be a really good second half of the season. And it has to, well, it started against Palace, but it has to start and continue with this game against Forest. So it's a difficult one to answer, Merv, because we have now got a few options to choose from. But what would your lineup be going into that game on Tuesday?
I would say interesting one, because we'll assume that it might be too soon for Partey. So I suppose if we assume that, I'm guessing it will be the back four with Ben White at right back and Zinchenko. I as far as I know, he's fit. I don't know unless I've missed out. I think he's fit.
I believe he is
at left back. I mean, I'm guessing it will be pretty much the same team. With Rice, Odegaard in midfield, obviously.
Havertz?
I don't know. That's the interesting one. Now, I don't know if the way that Mikel Arteta wants to use Kai Havertz, I suppose this is the big question mark. The way he wants to use Kai Havertz he might see Forest as a game where he can use that physical presence up front, occupying a couple of defenders, creating space for. I'd like to see Martinelli start, because I think I don't want Martinelli to come off the bench again, particularly if we're chasing the game up there. So I would like us to start and win the game with our strongest start and then possibly rest players with 15 minutes to go, 20 minutes to go ahead of Liverpool, rather than have to throw people on to try and rescue the game. So I'd like him to start strong. I don't know if that's with Havertz. It might be. Tactically, maybe he feels that he'll be a bit of a handful for the Forest defence. I just think that the role he has with us isn't that well defined. And, where I sit at the Emirates, I can tell that just from the conversations around me. No one's 100% sure what he's supposed to be doing or what balls he's supposed to be chasing or where he's supposed to be closing down. So you've got people who say, yeah, no, he's doing great. He's doing great. Others who say, get him off. He's doing nothing. And I think he's going to be one of those players really for this season who's going to divide the fans because they're not 100% sure. I think it's the role that he's there to play is almost a bit technocratic for some, and it's kind of, why do we need a player to do that? And so I think that Forest could be the kind of game like he scored the winner other places. He's come in late and scored towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, he scored against Luton, didn't he? And he should have had a goal against Villa.
Villa and Brentford, and so he can do that. Now, whether that's to come off the bench to then give Forest a different kind of problem to Forest defence a different kind of problem to deal with, or whether that's starting him and then bringing maybe Smith Rowe on with half hour to go if we're still haven't got the game won, shall we say? I don't know. I'd like to see him start because having spent that money on him, I want him to be successful. In fact, I was on the Same Old Arsenal podcast the night we bid for him. I don't think I was on with you, and it came as a surprise because it had just been announced, and I think nobody was really thinking of us signing Kai Havertz. So it's interesting that it still halfway into the season the fans seem, to me anyway, a bit divided as to the impact he's having and how and where he should be playing. But I think this could be the kind of game where his physical presence can give us something. But I'd like it not to be at the expense of Martinelli. But that's up to Mikel.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that there's still such a divide around him, and you're not wrong. It's the exact same where I sit at the Emirates. People are saying he's playing really well, he's playing badly. For the record, I thought he was pretty good against Palace. I don't think he tore up any trees, but I thought he was ticking things over, made some good runs. I don't think he was necessarily really bad in the game against Fulham either, but I mean, I'm really clutching at straws there because everyone was pretty poor in that game. But I think he's definitely a much improved player from the one we initially signed. Still has his dips, still has some good moments, still has some bad moments. But I think, like you say, it's important that we have more of a defined role for him. And it's great that he can be versatile. And I alluded to it earlier, it's good that he can play in midfield and up top. But I really do think he was brought in as that guy to rotate with Jesus to be a bit of a different option. Because just look how effective he was against Liverpool. Like, he was a big problem. Like, he was a big asset for us up top. It's just that he can't put the ball in the back of the net. If he could do that, he'd be fantastic.
It's kind of he doesn't. I suppose he doesn't have the striker's instinct, if you know what I mean. So there's sometimes that he won't go for not the obvious option. But, a striker, tends to just put their head on the ball, just put their foot through it. He doesn't kind of do that. It's almost like he wants to give it to somebody else. And I think that's his kind of role, to keep it moving, to occupy a couple of defenders, create space for Martinelli or Jesus on the left. And I think it's probably a role he's still learning. It's quite, as I said, quite a technocratic role in a way, because it's not an obvious. He's there, we know what Bukayo Saka does. We know what Martin Odegaard does. We know what most of the players are there to do. And his is this kind of hybrid role where actually a great game for Kai Havertz doesn't mean he scores a couple of goals, but he's created space and created a situation in the opposing defence that has allowed others to score goals. I think that's where people don't quite, there are fans who just want to see everybody run around like mad for 90 minutes and that's it. I think his is, as I say, a slightly more kind of, as you say, defined technical role. And that's why it sometimes looks like he's not he's quite languid in his running as well. So it looks like he's not really putting the effort in. When I think he is. I think he's desperate to succeed. And I think it's for him, it's a bit of a new role. And I think it's a role that Mikel Arteta has created that he's still fitting into. But I want to see, I'd like to see him start, because I think Forest could be the kind of game, as we've said, some of the games against teams who maybe aren't in the top four or five, although he played against Liverpool well, as you said. Some of those games, I think he will cause a bit of a problem because they might not be set up for him. And maybe this is he does the first hour and then Smith Rowe comes on, and maybe those two are going to be rotating a bit over the next few games. I'd like Emil Smith Rowe to start some games rather than to come off the bench, because he'll begin to get frustrated. So I think that he could be the key player in a game like this.
Yeah, touching on Smith Rowe, we both agree he was fantastic when he came on against Crystal Palace. But he hasn't really been given an opportunity to start games in the Premier League. I think the only one he has started was the 5-0 win against Sheffield United, where, again, he was just gradually building up, minutes off the bench until he got that start. I don't think we're going to see him start in the Premier League or the Champions League anytime soon, unfortunately. But what I do think is important is that Arteta trusts him off the bench a bit more, because it's great that he came on against Crystal Palace, but we were 3-0 up in the game. Yeah. If we were 1-0 down, would he have brought Emil Smith Rowe on? I'm not entirely confident he would. So for you, Merv, how important is it that he starts to give him minutes off the bench that aren't just in situations where the game is effectively won?
I think it's very important, because he's one of our own, if I can use that expression. And I don't think I've certainly not come across. And I say where I sit, there's a very diverse range of views, but I've not come across anybody that doesn't see Emil Smith Rowe as one of ours, and he should be playing, and we want to see him play, we want to see him succeed, and I think there's a lot of love for him. I think that it might be that as Mikel is trying to evolve us tactically, he's kind of not falling between the cracks, but it's kind of, if we think back to the beginning of, not last season, I think it was the season before, when we had those big wins at home against Spurs and stuff, when he was playing really well and scoring. I think we thought he was there. Yeah, he'd arrived, Saka and Emil Smith Rowe. Those were the two that were going to drive us forward. And obviously we've evolved from that. We've signed players like Declan Rice. And so I want him to succeed because he's an Arsenal boy, and I wouldn't want him to go to, I won't name names, but
anyone.
I don't mean the ones up the road. I mean other clubs like West Ham and stuff. I would hate to see him go to a mid-ranking Premier League side and move them up the league. I can't. I mean, if Arsenal suddenly said we'll sell him, I'm not sure that he would be joining Liverpool or United or it would probably be someone like a West Ham. And I just, to me, it was such a waste, because it's he's one of ours through and through, and I want to see him succeed, and I think he can succeed because he has put runs together of games, albeit a couple of years ago, where he was very influential and scored key goals. But it's whether or not, as you say, in the new setup, Mikel trusts him from the start. I don't know whose role he would take. We will start. The strongest starting lineup in midfield has Declan Rice in it. It has Martin Odegaard in it, and probably Thomas Partey as well. So what does he play? Is it more of an attacking role on the left? What is his role, I suppose, that's what needs to be defined. And I'm not sure that Mikel has a specific defined role for him, and that's why he only brings him off the bench at those times.
Well, I think there's going to be certain games for him. And I think that Sheffield United one at home that he did start, I'm not sure if he started it with Fabio Vieira or with Martin Odegaard, but I do remember he started that game, and that was one where you could look at and go, okay, Sheffield United at the time were pretty poor. It was a game that we expected to win. We did win it 5-0, but that was the opportune moment when there wasn't any real big pressure on it, particularly early on in the season when, stakes weren't all that high. Obviously now every single game is imperative, and looking at our fixture schedule, there isn't one that I see on the horizon where I can see Arteta taking a risk and playing him from the start. I think if you carry on like we did against Palace and build him up with these half-hour spells, then there could come a point where he is good enough to start a game because his performances off the bench will have merited that. I think when you're at home against a team that you expect to dominate, that's when you'll see him playing that left 8 role. I do think he's got a place on that left-hand side as well in Martinelli's role, but for me, long-term, in midfield, in the left 8. And that doesn't have to be at the expense of someone like Kai Havertz. It could be Havertz up top, Smith Rowe in the midfield, Partey or Rice at the base, Ødegaard on the other sides. Options, or even if you wanted to rest Martin Ødegaard, play him on that right hand side, Declan Rice in the left 8, Partey at the base. I mean, so many options, and this is what we've got now with everyone coming back. I mean, it's still a long way off having the entire team fit, but even with players like Fabio Vieira offering something different, I mean, where does he even fit into this team now? There's just options everywhere, all across the pitch. So just before I get into the last point in the podcast, mate, just to have these players coming back, to have had that win against Palace, to hopefully, fingers crossed, get a win against Nottingham Forest after what was a very disappointing start to 2024, where people were saying the league is gone, we've bottled it. It feels a bit more positive now, doesn't it?
Well, I'm always positive until it's impossible. I've always believed, ever since I was a little kid and my dad started taking me from age 3, I always thought even if we were 3 down, we'd still come back and win, even if there's only 15 minutes left. So I'm always very confident. But I think that, we've got players coming back at the right time. I think that having Thomas Partey and Jurrien Timber coming back is probably quite key, because they were obviously, I think the intended starting 11 for the season included both of them. I think that, you need a big squad. So you need a squad because you can't, there is a danger that players like Bukayo Saka will be overplayed. And we need to kind of guard against that. And we've seen Martinelli slightly rotated, like Palace, he started on the bench. I doubt that we're going to see Bukayo Saka starting on the bench anytime soon, but because of the way we're set up. But I think it's important to have everybody coming back and fit. I think that there is a feeling, and this is just amongst fans that I talk to, and obviously there's a whole range of opinion online, but just ones at the games we're talking to. I think that players like Fabio Vieira, people aren't 100% sure what his role is and does he start in our strongest starting 11? Is he a starter? And the answer is probably no.
No.
So and you say the same about Emil Smith Rowe. In our strongest starting 11 at the moment, is he a starter? Possibly not. Although, as you said, it could be in that left 8 role. It could be in the role that Kai Havertz is playing at the moment. But I think so. There is, because they're not in the starting 11. And this is the mind of a football fan, because they're not in our obvious starting 11, they're not seen as being as good. And so it's kind of, Fabio Vieira, I think, has a lot of skill. Whether he's strong enough for a top 6 Premier League team week in, week out, I don't know, because I've not really seen enough of him yet. But he can certainly come off the bench and influence a game. And I suppose it's whether or not he is happy with that role. Because in our strongest starting lineup, I don't see where he starts. But I think he's a great player to be at the club.
Absolutely. And like I say, it's just about having those options, and fingers crossed when he comes back fit, with Partey back now, with Timber, etc. Like we've spoken about so much this afternoon, I think we're just in a very fortunate position to have such depth, such options, but got to keep them fit. Otherwise, it means absolutely nothing. But Merv, just as a last point, I know it's always difficult to give predictions, but heading into this one, what's your score prediction for this game?
My score prediction for this game is 3-1 to the Arsenal.
Fantastic stuff. And just before I let you go, where can people find you across social media?
On X, I'm at Mervyn Dinnan. It might not interest most of our listeners, but I'm most active on LinkedIn, but that's all business and work type stuff. And I have my own podcast, but it's a work podcast called HR Means Business. But you're welcome to listen to it if you've got any interest in HR or the world of work.
Fantastic stuff. Make sure to connect with Merv, particularly on Twitter, to see all his football-related stuff. And if you're interested in HR, of course, get on his LinkedIn. But Merv, thank you ever so much for joining me. Appreciate it. It's a bit of an odd time on a Sunday midday, but yeah, it's been really good chatting to you. And fingers crossed. Fingers crossed we can get a great win on Tuesday night.
I'm feeling confident. So yes, and if you're going, give them a shout.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah, you heard it there from Merv. If you're going to the City Ground, make sure you sing loud, sing proud, and make sure Arsenal get over the line with what will hopefully be a thumping victory. But yeah, thanks again, Merv, for joining me. Been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you to everyone that's joined us live on YouTube. To those listening back on audio platforms, make sure to give us a review. Like the video, subscribe to the podcast. From myself and Merv, we'll be catching you very, very soon. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.